It is 50 below zero on the high plains of North Dakota, and there is a man standing inside the cab of a locomotive who could be in a warm hotel bed right now. He is not. He is up on top of the tender, in the wind, scooping water, because that is the job, and the job does not care that the spit freezes on his beard before it lands. 50 below. The kind of cold that turns the bolts in a steel bridge into gunshots when they snap. And he chose to be out here instead of in a bed with a roof and a radiator. People hear that and they think the man is crazy. He is not crazy. He just knows something you do not. There are things worse than the cold, and most of them are waiting the second you walk away from that engine. Before we get into it, hit subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. We want to know who's out there. Start with the lie everybody believes. People look at a steam locomotive, a giant iron machine with a fire roaring inside it hot enough to melt the grate, and they assume the cab must be the warmest place in the county. Toasty, a little iron house with a furnace in the middle. It is one of the great myths of railroading, and any old head who actually ran one in January will laugh in your face. Here is the truth. On a steam locomotive in deep winter, the front of your legs would be cooking, roasting. The back head of the boiler, that wall of hot steel right in front of you, would have your shins piping hot. And at the exact same moment, your back 6 inches behind you would be just above the point of turning to ice. Front of you on fire, back of you freezing, all at once. The men called it working between ice and fire, and they meant it literally. It got worse than uncomfortable. Even inside the so-called all-weather enclosed cabs, the ones the Great Northern and the Union Pacific and the Milwaukee Road bragged about, when it was 30 or 40 degrees below zero outside, it was still only about 30 to 35 degrees inside that cab, below freezing, inside a working steam locomotive. Because think about what that machine is doing. It is sucking enormous quantities of frozen outside air into the firebox to feed the fire, and the whole cab is built out of cold steel that radiates the chill straight back at you no matter how big the fire is. The fire heats the boiler. The boiler does not heat you. The railroads were not blind to it. By the modern era of steam, the late 1930s and 1940s, most big locomotives had steam heat pipe coils tucked under the engineers' and firemen's feet, and the Union Pacific bolted a whole rack of steam heating coils onto the back wall of their enclosed cabs every fall, then took them back out every spring. It helped. A little. The front of the 2 men in the seats got warmer. Everybody else in that cab stayed chilled to the bone. You cannot bolt enough coils onto a machine to beat back 40 degrees below zero when the machine itself is breathing ice. Now add the fireman's job. Before mechanical stokers came along, the fireman shoveled coal by hand, tons of it on a mountain grade. He would work up a soaking sweat, drenched through his shirt, and then the train would barrel into an icy crosswind, and that sweat would start to freeze on his skin. Soaked and frozen at the same time, on a 16-hour shift. One old railroader put it plainly. The fireman's job in winter was a man killer. And then, there was the water. This is the part that gets me. A steam locomotive drinks water constantly, and somebody has to put it in the tender. So even with those fancy enclosed cabs, the fireman still had to climb up out of whatever little warmth he had, up on top of the tender, exposed to the full force of the wind, at 30 and 40 degrees below zero, to take on water. Out on the Saskatchewan prairie, the Alberta plains, the Dakotas, climbing around on iced-over steel, high up in the wind, with water sloshing that could soak him and then freeze him solid. Picture it. You are 40 feet from a roaring fire, and you climb up onto a steel deck slick with ice, in a wind that cuts through every layer you own, and you wrestle a heavy water spout into the tank, while the overflow splashes down and freezes to your gloves and your boots. Then you climb back down and do your real job. Pneumonia was an ever-present threat. Men who worked those extreme temperature swings, fire to ice and back, all shift long, got sick, and some of them did not get better. The machine itself was trying to die too. The worst enemy was the water freezing in the hoses between the locomotive and the tender. If those hoses froze, the water stopped flowing to the injectors, and a steam locomotive that cannot get water into its boiler is a catastrophe waiting to happen in very short order. So the crews fought it. They would take a torch and gently, carefully thaw the frozen hose, blowing hot air at it, never the open flame directly, because if you burned through that hose, you were finished out there in the cold. There is at least one story of a crew thawing frozen pipes with burning oily rags who set the wooden cab on fire and burned the whole thing to the ground. The fire that kept you alive was the same fire that could kill you. So why would any man choose this over a hotel? Because the railroad does not run on hotels. It runs on getting the train over the road. And in the worst of it, walking away was not an option, because if you abandoned that engine in 50 below, the engine died. The water froze solid. The whole machine seized, and a frozen dead locomotive blocking a main line in a blizzard is not just your problem, it is everybody's problem behind you for 100 miles. This did not end with steam. People assume the modern diesel cab fixed all of this. It helped. But go ask a railroader who works the northern tier today. On a modern diesel locomotive, the engine does not even use antifreeze. It runs on plain water with a treatment in it, because nobody wants 180 gallons of antifreeze dumped on the ground if a line lets go. Which means in deep cold, that engine cannot ever really shut off. If it gets too cold, a valve under the frame, the men call it the Ogons valve, just opens up and dumps all the cooling water out onto the snow, rather than let it freeze and crack the block. So in brutal cold, the railroads order crews to leave the engines running all night, burning 5.5 gallons of fuel an hour just to keep the machine from killing itself. And the men out there now still tell the same kind of stories. Harry Anderson worked a short line across the North Dakota prairie. 23 winters of digging out snow-covered rails, chipping ice off switches, and fighting half-frozen levers until his face went crimson and his glasses iced over. On one run in 1969, it took his crew 8 hours to move a train 31 miles. Fighting frozen switches the whole way, the engine busting through drifts that threw snow up over the front windows, the train so heavy on the grade it would not pull, and they had to leave half of it behind and come back for it. A brakeman who worked the iron ore lines up north said it best. "Out in an open car below zero," he said, "it is the coldest thing on earth." And then he said the thing that explains this whole story. He said it was never closer to heated cab than when you finally climbed back into the heated cab of the locomotive. That is the secret. That cab, the one that is freezing cold, the one with fire in front and ice behind, the one that is only 35 degrees inside when it is 40 below out. To the man whose job is out there in the real cold, fighting the switches and the drifts and the winter, that miserable half-frozen cab is the warmest, safest place in his whole world. He does not refuse the hotel because he is tough, although he is. He refuses it because out here, the machine is the only thing keeping him alive, and you do not walk away from the thing keeping you alive. 50 below. The fire in front of him, the ice behind him, and a man who would not trade that seat for any hotel room on Earth.